Time now for this week's Goofy Award. I'm going to start with a quote and a question. First, the quote. Mark Carney, on meeting President Trump Tuesday, October 7th at the White House, stated in quotes, "Mr. President, you kindly hosted me and some of my colleagues a few months ago, and I said at the time, you're a transformative president. And since then, the transformation in the economy, the unprecedented commitments of NATO partners for defense spending, peace from India and Pakistan through to Azerbaijan and Armenia, disabling Iran as a force of terror. And on this, a solemn day of commemoration of the horrific attacks of October 7th, for the first time in decades, hundreds of years, thousands of years, this prospect of peace that you've made possible, and Canada stands four square behind those efforts." Now, I could be a smart aleck and ask, is this what he meant by elbows up? I know. Let's ask Mike Myers and Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew. But the answer is obviously no, it's not what they meant by that. And it underlines the farce that was arguably the main attraction of the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party during the election. One thing for sure, Liberal partisans and members of the media wouldn't be silent if it was Pierre Poilievre congratulating President Trump that way. But have some compassion, by the way, for diehard Liberal partisans. It's not been an easy time. I mean, come on, after years of pillaring Poilievre and the Conservatives for opposing the major legislation like the carbon tax or the capital gains tax increase, well, Prime Minister Carney turns around and supports the Conservative position by canceling the capital gains increase, lowering the carbon tax rate to zero, claiming it would be put more money in the pockets of Canadians, which was a complete reversal of the Liberal claims up to that point. So what were diehard Liberal partisans to do? Well, nothing, of course. They couldn't admit they'd been that wrong. And they'll be bending over backwards, by the way, to explain why Prime Minister Carney's performance this week in the White House, that has elicited descriptions like bending the knee, sycophantic, even bromance with President Trump. But let me be clear. I'm not critical of the Prime Minister's approach. Yeah, I cringed a bit, but I understand it. I was highly critical, on the other hand, of all the insults that have been hurled at Trump by especially Justin Trudeau and others over the years. They're counterproductive. They achieve nothing. And I'm even more critical of the fact that self-described progressives don't bother to do a moment's research. That would inform them that the devastation that would incur if we stop trading with the U.S. Now, Prime Minister Carney clearly understands that. Without a U.S. trade agreement with Canada, our economy would contract by a third. We'd lose something like 2 million jobs. Government revenues would crater. We'd get a federal government debt downgrade. And even a trade deal with all 27 members of the EU, India, every country in Africa and South America would not offset the loss of no U.S. trade. Prime Minister Carney, indeed, Canada has no choice, despite the rhetoric, manipulation, and lofty promises of the election campaign. That's why this week at the White House, Prime Minister Carney talked about things like joining that Golden Dome defense and delivering oil to the U.S. through the Keystone XL pipeline. He understands those issues are important to President Trump, and to heck with things like diversifying our oil exports away from the U.S. But the goofy part is how many of us were fooled along the way. And as Carl Sagan stated, you know what? Once we've been bamboozled long enough, it's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken.